knocked the first 13 verses out of the park, and then I've got the genealogy, so I'm excited about that. And then I know for many of you, the genealogy is actually your favorite part of the book of Exodus, and you've been eagerly anticipating this moment, and so away we go. One of the great delights of being the pastor of the Village Church is the men and women that God has brought onto our staff that I get to kind of co-labor with in the mission of God in this location among you as the members of the Village Church. And so one of the things that makes it a lot of fun for me is that we genuinely enjoy one another. We spend a lot of time laughing and crying and praying and hoping. And so it's a real delight to kind of wake up and get to come do work that I feel called by God to do among men and women that burn with a zeal to see you fully formed into the image of Christ, that you would be, by the grace of God, molded and shaped into all that God has for you in Jesus Christ. And so that plays itself out in significant ways. And so what I mean by that is you really are prayed for, probably more than you know, and that prayer can come with tears and an immense amount of hope. And so we're constantly evaluating, talking, trying to listen, trying to hear, to do all that we know God has called us to do. And so we know if we're gonna be the vibrant community of faith that God has called us to be, that salt and light to the world around us, we know as staff members, as elders, as deacons, that part of that is you growing in your personal relationship with Jesus Christ, a greater understanding of who God is, of what he's like, of what that means for you. But it also means that we've got to learn that not only has God called us to himself, but he's also called us to one another. And so we feel the weight of that. And so when we're on whiteboards or we're looking at budgets or we're kind of planning events, those are the things that are kind of pulsing through our veins, a zeal to see you understand rightly kind of this vertical relationship with God while simultaneously understanding the horizontal aspect of the Christian faith. And then we feel immensely the weight of trying to get you to fully embrace the church is not just an hour and 20-minute gathering, but what it means is to belong to the people of God in such a way that the rest of the week is decidedly marked by your understanding of Jesus. That you aren't to be pew dwellers, but really to understand that all that we're talking about in the gathering has implications for what occurs outside of this gathering. And we know we need to be serious about justice, and we need to be serious about mercy. We need to be serious about oppression. We need to be serious about these things. And so we feel the weight of that in a way that I think is unique. As pastors and ministers and deacons and elders, because we know what we're up against. We know the hurdles to see us accomplish or have formed in us the accomplishment of being men and women fully formed by the gospel of Jesus Christ. Now, if we stay at a high level, everybody knows what the hurdles are, right? To becoming a vibrant community of faith, the hurdle is sin, right? But for the purpose of our time together, I want to nuance sin, and I want to nuance sin the way the New Testament has nuanced sin. And I want to talk about the idea of strongholds and what strongholds are. And if you've got a background in church, specifically if you've got a charismatic background in church, when I say strongholds, you're probably thinking about demonic strongholds, right? And that certainly is found throughout the scriptures, and I don't disbelieve those things. But I think if we're going to be real honest about what the New Testament is actually talking about, it rarely, when it talks about strongholds, is talking about demonic powers, but rather broken mindsets. Here's how David Wilkerson explains them. A stronghold is a mindset, value system, or thought process that hinders your growth, the growth of others, and you exalting Jesus above everything in your life. So I love Wilkerson's kind of explanation of strongholds, that we're believing something false, and in believing that false thing, what happens is we've hindered our own personal relationship with Christ growing, it has hindered other people growing, and it has kept us from fully surrendering to Jesus Christ. Dr. Eric Mason goes on and says this as further explanation. A stronghold is an accusation planted firmly in your mind Satan establishes strongholds in God's people by implanting in their minds lies, falsehoods, and misconceptions, especially regarding God's nature. And so what's being described around the idea of strongholds is that we believe something or we see the world in such a way where it's distorted. And so everything we're doing, even though our intent is good, has been distorted because we're seeing incorrectly. And so the Bible calls that a stronghold because it's hard to spot because the very lenses that we're wearing keep us from seeing it. Are you tracking with me? So we're actually operating out of what we think is correct, and it's causing some carnage in our life, and we can't quite figure out what's wrong because the lenses by which we're operating and seeing are lies themselves. So this week, I sat down with some of our group leaders and some of our pastors, and we just started talking through our experience. I've been pastor here for 14 years. There are other guys that have been on staff with me for 8 years, 10 years, and we've got people that have been on staff for a couple of years, and so we got a good mixture of men and women together in a room, and we just said, hey, can we name the strongholds that we see most consistently at the Village Church? All right, because to be stuck in a stronghold doesn't mean saved or unsaved, right? We can all be stuck in strongholds to see incorrectly and then live a life based out of a lie that's rooted deeply in our heart, right? And so we sat down and so we talked about the Village Church. We talked about the men and women at the Village Church. We talked about the community in which the Village Church has been placed to be salt and light to the world around it. And so we started coming up with, okay, these are, and really we came up with 6 pretty consistent strongholds that we think are just kind of part of this area and the spiritual dynamics in this area. And so I want to run through those really quickly. The first stronghold is what we would just call individualism, or the rise of personal autonomy, right? The belief that everything's ultimately about the individual person. And when you're stuck in this stronghold and you're seeing the world through individualism, through self-autonomy, that what ends up happening as you live life is there, in one sense, is a type of laziness that undermines what you're really after. Because when you live your life based on self-autonomy, then everybody exists to make you happy, right? You are the sun, they are the planets, they all revolve around you. You become what the comedian Brian Regan calls a me monster, right? Me, I, me, I, me, I, me, I. And when you live this way, you're literally sucking the life out of others. You become a consumer. And when we talk about consumerism, we're almost always thinking about trinkets and toys and upgrading to the next iPhone, even though our regular one's fine, right? But they've just convinced us that we'll be cooler people if we upgrade. We're not. We're the same schmoes we were, just with a new phone, but it makes us feel like we're better people, right? So I'm not talking about consumerism in regards to stuff. I'm talking about consumerism in regards to people. See, when you're self-absorbed, when you live life in the stronghold with the lenses of self-autonomy as the ruler, as the lenses, then you're forced to use people. So you use them, you consume them for what you can get out of them. This thins out all of your relationships. This thins out your emotional capacity. This forces you to feel alone with a lot of people you know. Right? This is a stronghold. Another stronghold we see quite a bit in our area, and therefore we see it quite a bit in our church, is a type of sexual deviance where we are willing, because of the day in which we live, we are willing to trade in our souls for momentary bodily pleasure. Adultery, and on I could go with the perversion, not just in this area, but some of which has leaked into the church. We see economic selfishness all the time. Now, when I'm talking about economic selfishness, I'm not necessarily talking about a lack of generosity. In fact, you might be some of the most generous people I've ever been around in my life. What I'm talking about on this one, we really needed to kind of ferret it out, is that what we see happen often is an inability to be grateful and glad at where we are, but always wanting more. So when I'm talking about this kind of economic stronghold, I'm talking about we seem to lack the ability to go, look at how generous God is. Look what he's given us. How gracious and great is God that he's given all of us. We seem far more dialed into what we don't have than what we do. And so this robs us from gladness. This robs us from gratitude. It steals from us the ability to rejoice. despite the fact that God's been so generous to all of us, to all of us. We see a lot of fear, but it's a strange kind of fear. And again, we wanted to kind of dig into this, not just go fear as a blanket. What we found, especially among men and women at the village, is there's this fear of being found out. I'm going to be found out. They're going to find out I'm not all that they think I am. I don't know what you think we think you are. Like, this is the thing that we're banging the drum every time I put this face mic on. I mean, I try to lovingly every week say that you're not awesome. In fact, you're just kind of average. But I'm not doing that to be mean. I'm trying to get you to breathe and just rest in the fact that Christ has outed you on the cross, that all of us are in need, all of us are broken, all of us need help. And so we don't need to be afraid of being found out. We have already been found out. In fact, what we testify about when we're baptized is that this guy is dying with Christ, and I'm being raised to walk by the Holy Spirit's power into the newness of life. And I'm gonna stumble and fall and trip and get muddy again, and the grace of God is gonna cover me anew. And we celebrate that together as a family of faith. Not that we're perfect, but we celebrate that in our imperfection, his perfection sticks. Right? This is what we're celebrating as Christians. So there's this fear that we're gonna be found out. In fact, I think 9 times out of 10, the reason boldness is non-existent in most Christians' lives is because they're operating under a fear of being found out, to not measuring up to some imaginary standard that certainly isn't the biblical one. In fact, I think even if you would search your heart now, you embarrassed to have evangelized? You embarrassed to live boldly for Jesus? I wonder how much fear dictates that. A fear of being found out, a fear of not being good enough. And then I think the 5th stronghold would be just disappointment. And so again, I wanna keep saying this to you. I know this is not the way to build a big church. I don't know where we're getting the idea that life is always on an upward trajectory and shouldn't be difficult. I mean, I don't know where we're getting. I've got theories. I think the self-esteem movement has far damaged us as people, right? The everybody gets a trophy thing. Like, that's just a tough deal, right? It's just that, so when disappointments come, we don't know how to deal with them. And so what disappointment does when it comes and we're not ready for it is disappointment ultimately gets laid at the feet of God. I'm disappointed in God. And then we begin to take it out on others. All right, we're disappointed in God that leads to taking that disappointment out at others. And then maybe you're listening to me going, okay, nope. Okay, that leads me to the 6th one, self-righteousness, right? Self-righteousness. So what happens, and here's why self-righteousness is so insidious, and I'll say heartbreaking, because self-righteousness has at its roots some really good things and some things that are biblically informed, some things that are correct. It's in their application and the lack of grace for others that we become self-righteous. We begin to look down our nose at other people because they have not applied the scriptures to their own life like we've applied them to ours, believing that our application is the best. Now, I'm not being a relativist here. Let me give you some illustrations. So in my 14 years as pastor, here are the 2 that stick out to me the most. There was a season in time in which where your kid went to school was just like a really big deal. You know, like, you don't homeschool? They're not getting a Christian education? Oh, they're in public school. Have they started buying and or selling meth yet? No, well, I'll pray for you because they will. It's the only way. They're in public school. They're going to learn evolution. They're going to do drugs. Good luck with your grandbaby. You're going to be a young grandparent. It's going to be awesome. It was this really kind of weird. Now, what's the root of Christian education? What's the root of homeschooling children? It's all beautiful. It really is. It's a beautiful thing. It shouldn't be mocked. It's a beautiful thing to say, I want to raise my children this way. But it's not a universal principle that you ever get to look down your nose at others at. And then that's not even the crazy one. That's when you're like, okay. The crazy one was the near church split that almost occurred on how you have a baby, whether you go to a midwife or you go to a hospital. I don't know if you were around on that one. I was like, am I gonna have to address this from the stage? Like, you pump drugs into your baby before you have it. Okay. I mean, I guess that's one way to do it. I don't know if Jesus would have done it though. You're like, okay, first of all, Jesus ain't having any babies, all right? I mean, this was something we went through as a church. What is it? It's self-righteousness. It's rooted in good things. It's what makes self-righteousness so insidious. And it's why self-righteous people just think they're truth tellers. They don't think they're self-righteous. They just think they're right. And look, they might be right. But the looking down the nose, the harsh judgment of others, that's never right. So the truth behind it might be right. The application of it and the judgment of others is sinful, evil, and wicked. And Jesus saved some of his harshest words for the self-righteous. So we think these are kind of the strongholds that mark us as a community of faith because of the context in which this community of faith is playing itself out in this area. These are the strongholds of this area, so it makes sense that it would be our strongholds, things that we would have to wrestle through as those being saved out of that to be light to it, okay? Now, maybe you're at this point going, now what does the genealogy of Moses and Aaron have to do with all of that? And I say this every week, I love it when you're asking the right questions. So let's look at this, Exodus chapter 6, starting in verse 14. These are the heads of their fathers' houses, the sons of Reuben, the firstborn of Israel, Hanok, Palu, Hezron, and Carmi. These are the clans of Reuben. The sons of Simeon, Jemuel, Jamin, Ohad, Jachin, Zohar, and Shaul, the son of a Canaanite woman. These are the clans of Simeon. These are the names of the sons of Levi according to their generations. Gershon, Kohath, and Merari, the years of the life of Levi being 137 years. The sons of Gershon, Libni and Shimei, by their clans. The sons of Kohath, Amram, Izhar, Hebron, and Uziel. The years of the life of Kohath being 133 years. The sons of Merari, Mahli and Musi. These are the clans of the Levites according to their generations. Amram took as his wife Jochebed, his father's sister, and she bore him Aaron and Moses, the years of the life of Aram being 137 years. The sons of Izhar, Korah, Nepheg, and Zikri, the sons of Uziel, Mishael, Elzaphan, and Sithri. Aaron took as his wife Elishba, I keep wanting to say Elizabeth there, the daughter of Aminadab and the sister of Nashon, and she bore him Nadab, Abihu, Eleazar, and Ithmar. The sons of Korah, Aser, Elkanah, and Ibithaph. These are the clans of the Korites. Eleazar, Aaron's son, took as his wife one of the daughters of Putiel, and she bore him Phinehas. These are the heads of their fathers, houses of the Levites by their clans. These are the Aaron and Moses to whom the Lord said, bring out the people of Israel from the land of Egypt by their hosts. It was they who spoke to Pharaoh, king of Egypt, about bringing out the people of Israel from Egypt, this Moses and this Aaron. On the day when the Lord spoke to Moses in the land of Egypt, the Lord said to Moses, I am the Lord. Tell Pharaoh, king of Egypt, all that I say to you. But Moses said to the Lord, behold, I am of uncircumcised lips. How will Pharaoh listen to me? Now, when it comes to genealogies, if we're really honest, we just kind of blow through them, right? I mean, if they're on the Bible reading plan, we might even just skip over them altogether and kind of get past it. And yet, the genealogies are in the scriptures because God is wanting to communicate something to us. And what's interesting to note, if you ever get into the genealogies, if that becomes like a hobby of yours or something, is what you'll find is usually when a genealogy is given, there's a singular kind of truth that God is trying to communicate. And so what happens is oftentimes who makes the list in the genealogy is more about the point the Bible is trying to make than it is like when we look up ours and it's all about kind of the accuracy of who is where. And even then, I mean, who's not now related to some famous person back in the past? Seems like everybody I meet's great aunt was Queen Elizabeth I or something like that. And yet, where we're bent like that, all the genealogies in the scriptures are actually opposite of that. They're more interested in making the point that God wants his people to make. And there's a singular point being made here. And I'll give you that kind of robust point here in a second. But here's what I want to point out. That what we see because of this genealogy is that this is almost all caught up in the Levitical line out of the tribe of Levi. And what we see, which is the tribe of the priests in the Old Testament, and what we see in this genealogy is that Aaron and Moses come from a really broken and nasty line. Almost everyone listed in this genealogy is either never heard of again or what we know about them isn't pretty. Right, so I'll just point out a couple of these things. I don't know if you were paying attention when we were reading through the genealogy, but did you notice here that Moses' dad married his aunt? You see that? I tried to slow down and read that a little slower just so you could go like, wait, what, huh? Right, so that family reunion is a little weird. What do you call your mom aunt? Mom first would be my guess. And then Korah, who's on this list, ends up being swallowed by the ground for orchestrating a revolt against Moses. Two of Aaron's own sons, Nadab and Abihu, die from offering strange fire to the Lord. So here's the kind of family unit we're talking about. We've got all sorts of sexual deviance and incest, all sorts of broken stuff in the background. And then even as we watch Aaron and Moses live their lives, there's so much brokenness and weirdness going on. So you've got Aaron's two boys who are wild and out. Aaron is not a good dad. And like somebody's like, hey, eventually the Lord's going to light those fools up. And then God does it. He literally burns them alive. And so this is just like one family reunion. You go back a couple more generations. You see Abraham married his sister on his father's side. Jacob simultaneously is married to two sisters while both sisters are alive. Judah has an incestuous relationship with his daughter-in-law. Reuben commits adultery with his father's wife while the father is still living. This is our line, the people of God. So whenever somebody wants to argue that the Bible's been tampered with, here's what I always say. Whoever did that failed miserably at taking out what we need taken out so that we look good. Right, because this genealogy is the equivalent of you finding out that one of your great-great-grandfathers actually was an SS commander for Nazi Germany. And I'm guessing when you share that, you probably don't kind of leave him out, right? So what's your ancestry? Oh, I'm German descent. Means I like a good beard, some sauerkraut on my dog. I mean, I'm German. Really, have you done that Ancestry.com thing? Yeah, it's great. We're from Germany. Germany, I drive a Volkswagen. We're Germans. We're Germans. Sprechen Sie Deutsch, right? You're just leaving out like, hey, one of my relatives killed millions of people. You're just kind of leaving that out of the narrative, where the scriptures aren't doing this here. They're just letting all the ugliness and brokenness of this family's line just lay out there for all of us to see. Now, because we're Americans, here's the way we kind of see Moses and Aaron. So if you watch SportsCenter, or you watch, 60 Minutes, and you watch these kind of biographies that they do, these are the kids from the broken home, and it's just dark and broken and wicked, and they're the ones that made it out. So we kind of celebrate them. Oh, look at this. Moses hasn't slept with his sister. That's a win. Hey, look at here. Aaron hasn't, they've made it. They're kind of setting things on a new right course. And yet I think what we tend to overlook, that there tends to be in the American psyche a denial of how the past affects the present. A denial of how the past affects the present. Because if we pull this now back into the story, where we are in this story is Moses yet again arguing with God about what he will and will not do. And remember, this genealogy is almost like a commercial break. If you remember from last week, you've got Moses really arguing with the Lord. I'm not going to do it. Nobody's going to listen to me. I'm just telling you, no one's going to listen to me. And Moses already botched it up earlier when he went and said something different than the Lord had told him to say. So if we go back and now look at Moses through the lenses of this genealogy, starts to make a bit more sense. So if you grow up in a home like this, in a shattered home like this, then you're forced, and psychologists can tell you a lot about this, you're forced to kind of take on these kind of veneers to survive. You cope. And one of the ways you cope in a broken environment is you become the hero. You're gonna be the guy that fixes it. You're gonna be the guy that doesn't do it that way. You're gonna make things right. You're gonna do it differently. Now what does Moses do when he's 40? He tries to lead a revolt. I'm gonna make this right. He plays the hero. We know that he struggles with anger. I remember that time he killed a dude with his hands. He's an angry guy. In fact, although he will grow in that, it is ultimately his anger that leads to him not going into the promised land. He has a very difficult time trusting God. Really, throughout the story, this will be one of the last times him and the Lord get in this kind of tussle. He struggles to trust the Lord almost all the days of his life, right? Where'd that come from? Well, it comes from this environment in which he is birthed out of. Now, let me just clarify something here. I'm not giving anyone permission in here to blame mom and dad for current struggles. All right, here's what I'll tell you about your folks without knowing them. They did the best they could with where they were. They did the best they could with where they were. Here's what I know about them. They were sinners. They were imperfect. And they might have done some horrible things. Maybe not, but probably. And yet, they did the best they could with where they were. I want to encourage you to try to extend grace to them, especially if you're a parent, lest your kids one day remind you of all the ways you failed them. Right? They're anyone that nails parenting. Every one of us has got to college and we begin to see our parents' weaknesses. And what we want to be as grown men and women is gracious to our folks. Understand they just did the best they could in the spot that they were. But we've all been affected by the sin of others in our lives. We just have. And this is really drawing attention to the fact that Moses and Aaron aren't just from this terrible past, but they've still got residue from it, right? So I found this quote, and I wanted to track down who originally said it because it's ascribed to about 30 different people on the internet. But I was able to track it to a woman named Wendy Mass. I think this is the originator, but she said this: "Be kind, for everyone you meet is fighting a battle you know nothing about." Be kind. So what this information does about kind of this bloodline and the present struggles is laying out this truth that we don't talk about much, right? And that's that all of us got to where we are, quirks and all, hangups and all, brokenness and all, by experiences that are behind us or that we're currently in. And so what we see in this text and in this part of the narrative is the urging to be generous and kind to one another. To be gracious to one another. And that's not to give God a free pass for people to behave however they want. We're not saying that. We're simply saying, although there are standards of behavior that we should hold people to, we want to be gracious and we want to be kind. For as long as I think I've been your pastor, I've just been really honest about the first 7 years of my marriage. They were awful. And that there's not a better word than that, right? And it was kind of lay in my bed at night, oh my God, is this the rest of my life kind of awful? And just in case you're wondering, Lauren wasn't laying beside me going, all my dreams have come true, all right? And so it was contentious, it was lonely, I felt trapped. I felt like there was no way out for me, which is the same thing as trapped. I felt stuck in it, which is the same thing as trapped. And there was no, anything I say now is in that space, so I'm just gonna move on. And so I because of where I came from, I kind of made a promise to myself that I would never scream at my wife and I would never use my size to intimidate her. All right, I'm 6'5", about 210. I know I look gangly out there, but I'm a decent sized boy. And I was never gonna use my size to intimidate my wife. And so what I did was the more manly thing of just pout. And so I don't even remember what started the fight or what happened. I know Lauren had failed yet again. And so I'm in the kitchen, like cleaning plates and slamming around. And so Lauren does what any sane human being would do. And she said, hey, are you all right? How'd I respond? I'm fine. Just serving you over here, you know? And this had been 7 years of this, kind of this crazy roller coaster ride. And then, but this night, things changed. She came in, she was in the living room area, and then she came across our bar into the kitchen. She just walked right up to me. She buried her face in my chest, and she just started sobbing. She wrapped her arms around me and just started sobbing. And then she took a step back and she looked at me right in my face and said, Matt Chandler, I don't know what's going on in your heart, but I love you. And when she said that to me, I realized for the first time, I'm the problem. See, I'd spent so much of my energy trying to fix her, trying to get her to understand what she needs to do better to make this work, and I was the problem. My insecurities, my fear, and then just committed to it after that. I'm gonna get help for this, and went and saw I needed to navigate some things in me. I didn't know how to navigate. I could preach, I could memorize, I could teach, I could do it, but I couldn't navigate my own heart. I was broken, and it was kindness and grace that led me to see my brokenness. Knowing who I was, had she responded with aggression, I would just turn up. I would just, my defense mechanisms would turn up. And so we're to be gracious and kind towards those around us because we know that they're operating almost always out of hurt, out of brokenness, out of fear. So we want to be marked by compassion, kindness, patience. We see in this text really the thrust of the genealogy. Look at verses 26 and 27. I think you'll see 26 and 27 a bit different now that we've covered the genealogy. These are the Aaron and Moses to whom the Lord said, bring out the people of Israel from the land of Egypt by their host. It was they who spoke to Pharaoh, king of Egypt, about bringing out the people of Israel from Egypt. This Moses and this Aaron. It's like the Bible itself is like, these guys, this was the Moses. It's like there was this understanding that ancient Near Eastern people would be reading this and go, well, I know a Moses, but that can't be him. I know an Aaron, dude won't discipline his kids. We don't even hang out with him anymore for that. One day the Lord's gonna light those fools up. These are the men. See, here's the point of the genealogy. In spite of our past failures and present struggles, the work of God and the plan of God move inevitably forward through broken people. All right, I'm gonna say it again. In spite of our past failures and present struggles, the work of God and the plan of God move inevitably forward. It will not be stopped through broken people. That's what we see in this genealogy. This is what is being taught to us in this long list of names. Broken past and messy presents do not, all right, cut us out of God's big plan to seek, save, redeem, establish human flourishing. In fact, it qualifies us for it because all there are broken people. There's no one whole. There's no one righteous. The Bible goes through an exhaustive length of effort to convince us that that's all there are, broken people. That's why the veneer of Instagram is laughable. That's why you can take a picture of all the beautiful meals and fun times you've had, and I'll still bank on the fact that you ate some ramen noodles sometime last week, cried yourself to sleep, and got in a big fight. Because the Bible bids me that you are sinners. So, what does this have to do with strongholds? What does this have to do with mindsets that have us living falsely while understanding that ultimately God can move and work in broken people? So I want to go back over our list of 6 things. So what do all these things have in common? Individualism, sexual deviance, economic selfishness, fear, disappointment, and self-righteousness. So I think what we could do is we could take all 6 of those and we could distill it once again. So we took sin and we nuanced it down to these 6 strongholds. And I think you can take these 6 strongholds and you can nuance it again to one massive stronghold that we will need to fight with probably the rest of our lives. And here's what that stronghold is: an overblown sense of self. An overblown sense of self. That's the nice way to say it. The true way to say it is we tend to be narcissists. We struggle with narcissism. The real bondage that we're in is we're narcissists. We think everything's about us. Like, what on that list is not narcissism? Which one of those strongholds is not an overinflated view of the self? Certainly individualism is. Self-righteousness has the word self in it. Right? If we kept going, what's sexual deviance except narcissism? I don't care about my soul. I don't care about others. I'm going to get this physical thing that I want. That's narcissism. Economic selfishness, that's narcissism. We could read through all 6 of it. It's an overinflated view of the self. It's what makes us miserable people. right? So how do you fight this stronghold? How do you fight narcissism, right? Because narcissism is hard to see because we're narcissistic. It's hard to spot narcissism when you're so busy being the point, because narcissism can even feel right. So if you're like staring at yourself all the time and you're going, I've got to get better, I've got to be a better husband, I've got to be a better mom, I've got to be a better Christian, I've got to be a better, all of that feels right, but all of it is narcissism. It's still me, I, me, I. And what the Bible does to kind of waken us out of that is in the Old Testament, the prophets and David, they would say things like this: lift up your head, you sinners. Look up. And in the New Testament, it would say things like this: fix your eyes on Jesus, the author and the perfecter of your faith. Quit looking at you. Get your eyes up. So how do you do that? Well, you first and foremost, and by the way, none of these things that I'm about to say next is popular at all, and they're not popular at all because we're narcissists. All right, the first thing, if we're going to put on lenses, so if you remember, when we're talking about strongholds, we're talking about a way of seeing the world that's inconsistent with what God has for us. Therefore, we live life through these lenses in a way that keeps us from growing in our relationship with Jesus, keeps others from growing in their relationship with Jesus, and keeps us from fully surrendering to Jesus into the life that he has for us. It keeps our lives thin rather than thick. It keeps them shallow rather than deep. So how do we move from the thin to the thick? How do we move from the shallow to the deep? Well, now here's answer number one. In fact, the only answer, and I'll put 2 subpoints underneath it. It starts by denying ourselves. Now, when I'm talking about denying ourselves, I'm not talking about physical harm or self-hate. I'm talking about a hedonistic type of self-denial that knows there's a better treasure to be had via restraint than there is at unbridled living. So to show restraint marks us as humankind. You know who doesn't have restraint? Your dog. Your dog doesn't have restraint. Any pet you have doesn't have restraint. And I know Bootsy, you've trained him to be a real good boy, but I'm saying you let that dog go for a bit and all the rules that you've set up for little Bootsy will be gone, and it will not show restraint because it is an animal not made in the image of God. As humankind, we show restraint. It's what makes us human. We don't give in to all of our impulses, but because we know to live by our stomach will be to die by our stomach, so we restrain ourselves. We have impulses that we say no to, right? And if we didn't, we probably wouldn't be here. We'd be in jail, correct? Right? And so we want to deny ourselves for a greater treasure. So how's the best way to work that out? Because maybe even that is maybe too high level. Like, what does it mean to deny ourselves? Well, let me give you 2 ways. The first, again, I don't think it's going to be popular, but I think the best way to punch narcissism in the face is to serve others. To get your eyes off of yourself and begin to serve others. So Philippians 2:3-4 says this: do nothing from selfish ambition or conceit, but in humility count others as more significant than yourselves. Has there ever been a more un-American sentence ever written in the history of mankind? Consider others more insignificant? Or that I'm more insignificant than others? There's no way that's true. You're looking at me? See what I've done, what I've accomplished, how I've done it? Right? No. He's saying here, you consider others more valuable than you. That's painful to read. Let each of you look not only to his own interest, but also to the interest of others. How do you do this? See what the Bible's saying? Say, get your head up, look at Jesus, now serve others. Now you're not all about you, always staring about you, always worried about your marriage, always worried about your kids, always worried about your addiction, always worried about, no. Get your eyes up and serve others. Give to others. Be generous to others. And just so we don't I want to clear the table on any kind of romanticism around serving. I don't tend to watch scary movies anymore. I used to when I was younger, but the bad guys when I was growing up, they weren't like demons or just kind of weird, like just a camera showing a lady standing there for 30 hours or whatever it is on these new paranormal activity things. We just call that Tuesday around here. So in our day, it was just like murderous guys that couldn't be killed. Like how many Friday the 13th were there? like 14. In one of them, and I didn't see it, but in one of them, I think Jason went to space. Like, how did Jason Voorhees get to space to kill campers? Or Freddy Krueger. Like, I mean, these dudes just wouldn't die. You could blow them up, drown them, burn them, dismember them, bury them alive. They just came back for the next movie, same weapons. Now, I say all that because narcissism is much like those villains. Narcissism just doesn't want to die. And so as you try to kill it via service to others, you will have to pay attention to that stronghold because you will hear the voice inside of you say, why isn't anybody serving you? Why are you always the one giving? When is it your time to be served? Nobody else in your group's doing this. Gosh, when is someone going to take care of you? You work hard every week. Shouldn't you have some space where it's just all about you? And it'll sound right. It's called a stronghold because it's a stronghold. So you lift up your eyes, you deny yourself by serving others and being serious about serving others. No romanticism about how awesome it's going to be. No kind of silver bullet, this is going to solve all my woes. Serving others is difficult because people are difficult. Amen? Yeah. And so not only do we serve one another, but then another wildly unpopular idea is we want to commit to a people for the long haul. We want to serve others and we want to commit to a people for the long haul. Let me read this, Colossians 3:12-14. Put on then as God's chosen ones, holy and beloved, compassionate hearts, kindness, humility, meekness, and patience, bearing with one another, and if one has a complaint against another, forgiving each other as the Lord has forgiven you, so you must also forgive. So I'll stop there for a second. I want to point out a couple of things that this text really lends itself to the reality of relationships in a given context, right? So look back at it again, all right? That we need to put on compassionate hearts, kindness, humility, meekness, patience. And then where does it go after patience? Bearing with one another and having complaints against one another, forgiving one another, right? It's like the Bible knows what being human is actually like. Like if we're gonna have any kind of real relationship with one another, right? Not some surface level, like some deep, real, emotionally connected, not stunted, not thin, thick, not shallow, but deep relationship, that means I'm going to offend you. And you're going to offend me, and we're gonna have to figure out in that space how to forgive one another, how to bear up with one another. Yesterday marked the end of the fall flag football season. My son's team, I've been with that team for probably 4 years now, 3 or 4 years now. I've coached the defense, and we had a great playoff run yesterday, lasted about 50 minutes, and then we went and had pizza. That's what you do after you get thumped in the second round of the first round of the playoffs. I don't even remember. And we went to Grimaldi's on the patio, and we handed out trophies, and man, that group of men and women, almost all of them believers, they go to Valley Creek, a couple of them are evangelical Catholics. There's just all this whole group of men and women who I've got to kind of see every fall, and then every spring, and then fall, and then spring, and occasionally at Edison's, and every once in a while at Chili's. And it ended yesterday, and we're done in that league now. And I said goodbye to all of those. Several of them attend here, not all of them, just a couple of them attend here. And that'll be that. And there's no emotional loss for me in that. And life won't really change or be affected much because of that. And I'm just telling you that in the climate in which we live, this is most people's church experience. They treat churches like ecclesiological buffets that exist to serve them rather than they exist to serve the body of Christ. So there's no commitment. There's just constant turnover every 4 to 5 years, right? You're just looking for the next best thing. And here's, hopefully, if you've been around for long, if you're a guest, you might not know this about me. Like, I can tell you this. My understanding from the Word of God is that I will, as an elder and as the primary teacher here at the Village Church, be held accountable to God for the souls of the members of this church. So I'm never on a membership drive, ever. Because the bigger that is, right? The more account I will have to give. The smaller that is, the better it is for me, right? I mean, if there was like 6 of us in my house, how awesome would that be? I'd be like, Lord, I've done all I can. I know all 6 of them, I know, right? But like, this is crazy. So I'm not doing a membership drive here, because here's what I can say. That whether you join here or not, or join somewhere else or not, I can, before the Lord, say that my hope for you is that you would be able to put down roots somewhere, stop sitting in the pews and plug in. Don't go to church, belong to one. Right? Don't go to church, belong to one. Dive in, get deep, quit being a spectator. Because what happens is the expectation, and I'm not sure what it came from, maybe the revivalistic movement in the early 19th century, but the idea that a sermon is somehow gonna form you in a way that only life with the people of God can form you is a misnomer, right? And we can feel it. We can feel that it's not happening, and so we pick places based on criteria that the scripture certainly doesn't give us. And then after about 5 or 6 years of just listening to sermons, we start saying really crazy stuff like, I just don't feel fed there. Because transformation is life on life, not sermon on ears. Transformation occurs life on life, and through the highs and lows and the monotony in between. A good way to think about it is marriage. Tiff and Doreen Cothran, longtime members here. They were here when I got here. They were here maybe before I was born. Been married, I think, 60 years. I wasn't a joke. They've been married 60 years. Married 60 years. Like, that's unbelievable. And if we could have a real conversation about marriage, here's what we would be able to say in all honesty, regardless of how long you've been married or who you are. Marriage is, there are really beautiful days and weeks and months in marriage, and there are really difficult days and weeks and months in marriage, and then there's a whole lot of monotony in between. There's beautiful seasons, there's hard seasons, and then there's just seasons where you get up and make the coffee and go to work. And it's just Tuesday. Right? You go to work, she goes to work, you come home, you figure out what's for dinner, you have dinner, you put the kids to bed, and then you both exhaustedly go to bed yourself. It's not a high, it's not a low, it's Tuesday. Right? And that's what marriage is. But if you want to get to where Tiff and Doreen are, you want to see your kids grown and even your grandkids almost grown, and see a couple of great grandbabies rejoicing in the God of your youth, you have to survive through the difficult days. You commit, you stay in the disagreements, in the difficulty, in the hardship, you stay. And in so doing, you move from the thin to the thick. You move from the shallow to the deep. Now I want to put an asterisk on this. And I think by doing this, I'll prove to you what I said earlier about if we're for you, praise God. If we're not, just plug in somewhere. Ladies, if you are in a marriage with an abusive